the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. Resiliency is a term that we hear commonly in the world today, and for good reason. Data shows us that being more resilient can decrease your stress, improve productivity, decrease burnout, enhance our relationships, and even reduce mortality in some situations. However, when we're in the thick of struggling through life's challenges, someone just telling us to be more resilient may feel a bit more like they're gaslighting us rather than actually inspiring us. So, how do we become our most resilient selves when many of us feel like we're already being pushed to the edge? That's what we hope to answer for you in today's session titled, Improving Your Resiliency, How to Thrive When Life Gets Messy. To help us with this topic, our expert today is Dr. Anjali Bagra. Anjali, welcome to the Human Optimization Project.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited about this topic. I know you're an expert in this area. You got a lot of experience to share, so we're very honored to have you today. Dr. Bagra is a medical director of enterprise automation and the Office of Belonging at Mayo Clinic. She's a consultant within general internal medicine. Her prior roles include being vice chair of faculty development, educational chair of integrative medicine. Her research focuses on enhancing individual and organizational resilience, and she's authored over 80 publications to date. She's the co-founder and co-director of the Mayo Clinic Conference on Resilience and Leadership titled GRIT, which stands for Growth, Resilience, Inspiration, Tenacity in Medicine. Dr. Bagra, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. And I'd like to outline for the audience the three big questions that we're going to tackle with you today. Okay? So in our first section, our big question we're going to focus on is what exactly is resiliency and why does it matter so much for health, happiness, and performance? And then the second big question, why do so many of us struggle to be resilient and how does that impact us personally and professionally? And then in our third section, we'll try to get into some solutions. And our big question there is, what steps can we take to become our most resilient selves? Does that sound fair to you?
Sounds amazing.
All right, let's dive in. So in our first section, we're going to talk a little bit about what resiliency actually is and why it matters. So can we start just by defining resilience? So as a resiliency expert, I want to hear, how do you define the term resilience?
Yes, let's kick off with some baseline understanding. So there is a scientific definition of resiliency, which is our ability to adapt or bounce back when faced with adversity. It's got a lot of different, I would say, constituents, which includes things like physical resilience, emotional resilience, mental resilience, and spiritual resilience. And I think this is something that doesn't come out explicitly when we just look at the scientific model of resilience. But my personal definition of resilience is really silent energy. It's your quiet force. It's your resolve. It's your intention. So it really is, you know it when you see it. And the best way for me to wrap my head and arms around that at a personal level is thinking of individuals when I think of resiliency. And to my mind, resiliency is when I think about my mom. Resiliency is when I think about my kids. So our younger son is going to be a D1 athlete playing tennis. And when I think of, what is resiliency, I think of him. I think of people like Nelson Mandela. I think about people like Mother Teresa. Who do you think of?
Oh, this is a great question. And I love that approach too, because you're tying this to some really big names in history who have made a tremendous impact, but then also some regular day people that are very personal in our lives. And I feel similar about it. And to maybe add one more layer, I think about resiliency as this sort of fluid ability to adapt. So it sort of evolves and changes. And so for me, I think about those people that have been able to navigate circumstances that maybe weren't predicted or unforeseen. So if you think about what we all had to do during the COVID pandemic, for example. Our leaders had a lot that they had to navigate, but we also did it at a personal level too. Our lives were
Right.
upended and changed. And so, I mean, I think about everybody who dealt with those things too,
Yes.
like changing the way that they lived, the way they interacted with people. So you can think about people across the full spectrum, from the incredibly famous historical figures to the people in our
Right.
own family and that we work with every day.
Completely. I do want to add to that list. I had the opportunity and the honor of participating in a pilgrimage where a group of us from Mayo Clinic really traveled back to our roots in Assisi, in Italy. And throughout that trip and our discussions and lighthearted moments, the sense of pride and a deeper understanding of what resiliency meant and what's so foundational to our organization and to healthcare in general. But this was a deeply personal experience, really trying to be in those times with Saint Francis and the sisters, and how they really dealt with extreme adversity with very little resource, but ton of resolve and ton of determination and coming together to really help humankind. For me, like, that was a very deep personal experience of resiliency, and that's so foundational to who we are today.
Good. And I love you. You should look for it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned it transcends people. So it can happen to
Totally.
anybody, no matter their role or where they are in life. And it also sort of transcends time. So this is not a new phenomenon.
Correct.
That we've given it more attention recently, but we can see examples of people being resilient throughout the history of time. So I think
Yeah.
it transcends all people and kind of all time.
Correct. And I think the other piece is sometimes we box resiliency too much because we tend to think about it at a very individual level. And we miss the opportunity then to see the power of collective resilience, like resilient organizations, like who is standing the test of time with the value set that they are committed to. And I think that's a really important idea, especially on this podcast. You're the optimizer, and it doesn't happen with a single person standing by themselves, but it often becomes much more tangible, achievable, realizable, and have a real impact when we come together. So there is a lot of power in collective resilience. I know we're going to talk about this in depth, but it's very important for us to have a broader understanding of resilience and really getting to the core of human experience versus just like scientific definition.
And so, speaking of that, I want to know, where you think resilience comes from. Is it something that we are born with, or is it something that we develop over time?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So at the individual level, there is some contribution of genetics. Let's just kick off with that because we know, as we work with patients with depression, anxiety, or some other mood conditions, there is a genetic predisposition to, how we experience the world around us. Having said that, I think there is a big contribution of upbringing, just who we are as a person, our personality types. So there is, I would say, that that contributes to it, but that would be probably like half of the equation. What's really exciting is that it's very much a learnable, dynamic attribute, human attribute. It's not a fixed trait that you're either born with it or not. And if you're not, you're doomed. And if you are, then, you've arrived. That's not how it works out. I think it is also important to recognize that there is some role of these things in the background, but there is a lot in our own control.
Okay. So if we say it's something that we can control and we can take agency over it, my next question is, why should we? So what are the benefits of being a more resilient person?
Yeah, so there's a scientific answer to that, and you highlighted that in your introductory comments, and that's all right. Like, when we look at what helps, for example, patients with cancer, right? There have been a lot of studies, and this brings me back to work done by Dean Ornish, who really studied telomeres. And for our listeners' benefits, telomeres are at the ends of our chromosomes, and that's what keeps our genetic material intact. So it's kind of like if the shoelaces were like our chromosomes, the caps on our shoelaces are like the telomeres. And his work really highlighted the importance of having a very disciplined routine to building resilience, and showing a direct correlation with lengthier telomeres at the genetic level. And, that's one of the measures of senescence and aging. I think we know anecdotally, those of us who experience the impact of our resilience on our day-to-day life, like it impacts our mood, it impacts our productivity, it impacts our overall fulfillment, it impacts our relationships, it also impacts physical health. But with stuff like what Dean Ornish has done, we know it impacts our genetic material. We know it impacts our immune resilience. We know it impacts the level of inflammation in our body. So I think there is a very macro and micro level impact of resilience, not just on how we feel, what we perceive from our environment, but also physical health, immune health, metabolic health, as well as just our productivity as humans, our ability to have the most optimal impact.
Mm-hmm. And there are so few things in the world that actually can impact us so substantially in so many different domains. I mean, if you think about it, sleep, exercise, good nutrition are probably on that list. Resiliency,
Correct.
gratitude. And these are things that I think we often overlook, yet they're probably the most powerful and can have the biggest impact and sort of the most bang for our buck if we're trying to improve ourselves. It's not many things that you make this one change in your life and it'll have such widespread and outreaching impacts. Not only how you feel, but also now down to the genetic level, which I didn't even realize. That's incredibly powerful. What are some of the most common myths or misunderstandings that you hear about resiliency?
Yeah, so as we kicked off in our introductory comments, I think resilience means different things to different people. But in terms of myths, some of the most common myths that I've kind of seen over my last decade and a half is things like, well, resilient people are very stoic. They are the toughies, and you're gonna see them unfazed. That's not how it works out. Oftentimes, resilient people are vulnerable. They are very authentic with their emotions, and they are very expressive. And this could be a sad emotion or a happy emotion. So I find that to be a very common myth. The second is, of course, tied into what you and I were discussing earlier, like you're either born with it or you're not. I think there is not good understanding of the fact that we own this, we control this, this is a choice, and we need to be intentional around it. I would say some of the other ones include things like, if I'm resilient, I can do it all by myself, and I don't need others. And that is very interesting because oftentimes, we were sharing examples of who we think are resilient people in our lives, right, earlier on. And I would say every single person that's on my list is somebody who leans on people and widens their aperture and really cultivate a sense of community versus individualism. So I think that's a very interesting myth around, who is resilient versus not. The other piece I would say is resilience is not about speed. Another myth is like, if I can bounce back from an adversity very quickly, then I'm resilient. If I don't, then I'm not. I think that's a flawed mindset as well. This is not about speed, but it's about sustenance and how sustainably and reliably do we sort of come out of adversity with a developmental mindset versus I'm going to solve this problem in the next 5 minutes, and hence I'm very resilient. So I think what I'm really trying to say is there's no shortcuts. Speed is not resilience, but credibility is resilience. Consistency is resilience. Intentionality is resilience. And deep commitment is resilience. I would say those would be the top sort of myths that I think I see, hear, and am demystifying with my patients, colleagues, and learners a lot. And it's fascinating because I've had like learners come to me and say, well, Dr. Bagra, I thought I was very resilient, but it took me 6 months to get over a loss of a, I don't know, like a loved one or my pet. Or I was like, resilience is not about speed, right?
There's not a time limit
Correct.
on it.
The fact that you're actively thinking about it, the fact that you have a proactive plan, and the fact that you're committed to grow from an experience is what it's all about.
Great. So let's transition into our second section here, and we'll talk a little bit about why so many of us struggle with this. I think the benefits are clear and they're obvious, even more widespread than I realized, yet we still oftentimes really struggle with it. So let me ask you first, if we're going to talk about kind of why we struggle and this is something we want to improve on, I wonder, is there a way to objectively measure resilience? So is there a way I can tell I am being resilient or I'm not, or this person is or is not resilient?
Yeah. So there is scientific ways of measuring resilience. This is something I routinely do in my practice. When I see patients for these consults, they tend to fill out a few questionnaires. So we can measure resilience with validated scales. Some of these include the Connor-Davidson scale, which is actually a very lengthy scale. It has upward of 25 questions that we ask individuals, and then we come up with where they fit into a mild, moderate, a range. But there are shorter versions of those validated instruments, one of which we commonly use in our practice is the Brief Resilience scale, the BRS, which is a modified Connor-Davidson scale. But then there are other validated instruments that can be used and go hand in hand with these. And some examples would be the Perceived Stress Scale, or the PSS, because I think both of these go hand in hand. And these scales, I would say, are very similar to other scales routinely used within the realm of behavioral health and mental health, such as the PHQ-9 or the Generalized Anxiety Disorder or the GAD scale. So these are very similar in essence and the methodology of development to some of those scales. And I think for us, of course, it's really important that we have an objective way because I see patients for this and I want to have a good, tangible way of seeing whether we are really moving them in the right direction. There are anecdotal and day-to-day ways that people can gauge their resiliency, and you don't need complex scales to really measure your resilience on a day-to-day level. So I love doing something called a resilience audit, and maybe you and I should do that live for our listeners' benefit.
Absolutely.
And the way we would do something like a resilience audit is very simple. It's kind of like a 60 seconds activity, and we close our eyes, we take deep breaths, and maybe let's walk through it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
All
perfect.
right. So we have our eyes closed. We're going to take a big deep breath in and out. And the first thing we're going to think about is our physical resilience. Did we get a good night's sleep yesterday night? And are we hurting anywhere? Are we feeling our body? And we could think on a scale of 0 to 5. Where are we with our physical resilience right now? You don't have to share it with me, Chris. Just make a note of it. The second domain would be our emotional resilience. How are we feeling right now? Are we feeling like baseline happy, baseline sad? What is our predominant emotion right now? And are we in tune with it? Are we acknowledging it? Are we accepting it? And is it fluctuating? And then finally, we're going to think about our spiritual resilience. is what I'm doing right now really aligned with my higher meaning, values, and purpose? Do I feel a sense of meaning and purpose in what I'm doing in the short term? And is that aligned with my long term? And then let's take a big, deep breath and out. And let's open our eyes.
All right.
I know that was quick and brief.
No, it's helpful. Should I tell you kind of?
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I haven't done that before,
Yeah.
and it was helpful. So I'll tell you what I was thinking. You can kind of let us
Yeah,
know
yeah,
am
yeah.
I on the right track or not. So when you ask about the physical thing, how I'm feeling physically and tired, and on a scale of 1 to 5, I would put it at a 3 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and so I hadn't thought about it, but I tried to think why. Well, I covered a game last night, so I got home very late. So I went to bed probably 3 hours later than I normally do. So I'm sleep deprived. I also incorporated deadlifts back into my workouts 3 days ago, so I'm still feeling that a little bit in my low back and my hamstrings, which I haven't paid much attention to, but I've been ignoring. But it is good to draw attention to that.
Yeah.
So I hadn't thought about those things, but that's definitely affecting how I feel. On the emotional component, 5. I'm very happy, satisfied. I love doing this. I'm super passionate about doing this, so it'd be hard for me to imagine being in a better spot there. And then on the spiritual part, I rated a 4 because I think that this for me does connect with my meaning, purpose, and values, but it feels like something that I'm still striving to want to continue to get better at and still have a lot of areas to grow in. So those are some of the things that came to mind for me. Is that sort of the right thing to be thinking about, or what else am I missing there?
Absolutely. So first of all, one size does not fit all. There is no right or wrong. This is like a suggestion. This is like a format that we could use. I really think of ourselves as a bucket full of water with holes. That's really how we all function, right? So what's going to happen is over time, we need to keep filling our buckets. But if we don't know what element to focus on, we're kind of shooting in the dark. Every single time I do this personally or with a patient or with a big group or with my kids and family, I'm yet to hear somebody who came out and said, hey, I'm like 5, 5, 5, like everywhere. I'm replete. That, the fact is that this is work in progress. So this isn't a destination, it's a journey. And I think that in itself is very liberating, because things like how we are measuring things, well, I could feel something. My brief resilience score could be something very different today versus, next week. So it's something that we all need to understand contextually and know that there's always opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think just taking a minute to pause and do that assessment is so powerful, because there's a real tendency for all of us to just ignore, sort of suppress, just kind of, I got that ache, I'm just going to ignore it and keep plowing through. And so I think that oftentimes that is a maybe sometimes helpful strategy for us with that problem we're dealing with, or the emotional distress or the psychological distress. We just say, I'm just going to bury that down right now, and I'm going to keep grinding away. And some people may think that that is resilience. Sometimes I think that strategy might work short term, but can have some long-term consequences. So can you tell us maybe how that is similar to or different from resilience? Basically just taking the problem you're having, burying it or ignoring it temporarily.
So I like to think about that in 2 domains. So imagine throwing a bouncy ball on the wall with your, as much strength as you have, and then thinking that it's not going to come back because you just threw it away, right? Like it is going to come back to you much stronger with more force and momentum. So starting with that, I would say I like to think about things as things within my zone of control and things within my zone of action. If I'm overstressing over things that are not in my zone of control, but I get stressed about, I know that over time, if that keeps growing, I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to be highly unproductive. So one of the things that I like to do is move as many things as possible from my zone of control to my zone of action. And if I cannot do that, I put things in a parking lot. So there is a difference in this strategy versus I'm not just going to think about the stressors.
You're intentionally dealing with them,
yes,
right?
yes.
So rather than ignoring them,
Correct.
you're organizing them.
You're organizing
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
because it's true that sometimes we do need to, because we can't solve for everything, and we don't need to. We are not the ones who should be solving for everything. But sometimes, because of lack of clarity, what we tend to do is that I'm going to bounce this stress away from me and just hope that it disappears. It just comes back stronger. But if we've thought about it in a creative way with a logic, like, can I act on it? Can I not act on it? And if I can't, even if I don't control it, I'm going to accept it, that it's there. I'm going to acknowledge it, but I'm going to put it in the parking lot. Maybe someday I will be able to, not right now. And maybe I need to partner with someone. So I think there is an essential difference between just, pretending it's not there versus acknowledging it and putting it in the right bucket.
So I want to highlight this to our audience. You've taken a concept that I think to a lot of people sounds somewhat nebulous or arbitrary or
Yes.
soft. This concept of resilience, and it's kind of difficult to define. But you've told us that there are multiple validated scientific questionnaires and assessment tools that you can use to objectively measure it, that you can improve it over time. And then you've also just sort of taken us through like a very straightforward algorithmic kind of approach that you can use to improve it. So I think that this is a much more real, concrete, tangible thing than a lot of people realize. So we'll talk a lot more about those tips and techniques and steps that people need to be taking in our third section, which I'm very excited to get to. Are there, one of the questions I have for our audience out there, are there certain types of people or personalities or careers that are more likely to struggle with resiliency?
Yeah, I want to actually flip that question a little bit. There are professions and careers that demand individuals to be more resilient. And since we are in healthcare, I would say we are in a profession that in itself, by the design of taking care of the sick and the ailing, and really doing it in a teams-based approach in the most optimal way, utilizing resources that are often scarce. Imagine, what is the kind of human trait that is needed for us to be able to do this effectively. So, because I think, when we look at criteria for med school admissions or, training, I would say there is heavy emphasis on who is that person who can thrive and be a meaningful contributor in this profession. So I like to flip this question because it's not that in certain careers we struggle with resiliency, but I think it's the other way around. For certain jobs, roles, careers, we absolutely need this to be a strong, component of who we are. Because without resilience, I think it would be very hard to have longevity in these careers. The other, I would say, is elementary education. Teachers. I mean, I know we both have kids, and I have had tremendous gratitude.
Yeah, bless them.
Right,
Bless
like
them.
for
Yeah.
for our teachers, and certainly us serving as medical educators. I mean, I see the level of resilience and this next level of resilience I need to cultivate to be able to be an effective educator. Think about our first responders, our frontline workers, airline crew. Think about Captain Sully when he landed on the Hudson, the emergency landing. We absolutely, so those are situations where I think, this is a key ingredient for us to be effective, impactful, and meaningful contributors in the professions that we choose.
So earlier we said it sort of transcends kind of all people,
Yeah.
all times, and
Correct.
it's really kind of all careers and all situations as well. So I think it seems to be a very universal concept. The other thing I'm hearing you talk about is that this seems like it requires an appropriate mindset, so a correct mental position, but also some actions that you need to take. So it is sort of a combination of those two. So I'd like to keep that in mind as we move into our third section. And our question here is, what steps can we take to become our most resilient selves? So I want to ask, and I think we've kind of already answered this, but just to reiterate, is resiliency trainable? And is that true for anyone?
So the answer, short answer, absolutely yes. Resiliency is a dynamic process, and we are gifted with something called neuroplasticity, which means that our brains are forever changing and evolving. And when we talk about resiliency, stress management, a lot of these things are really working around the neuroscience and understanding, how we can do this in a dynamic way. I would say the key ingredient of a successful resiliency plan is intention. This is something that needs to be prioritized. This isn't something that's going to happen by the way. There are phases to this, right? Like when you're becoming much more aware of the importance of this, and when we are beginning to have a more proactive, objective plan, and it's the first time I'm going to integrate like a resiliency practice, it's going to feel a little more work, right? But over time, with the benefits that you see, I think I see a lot of transition of my patients, my colleagues, me, myself, having undergone this journey, which is ongoing. It really becomes, it comes to a point where we become unconsciously competent. So, starting from unconsciously incompetent and then winding up to unconsciously competent. So it's a journey. Anybody can do this. There are ways to do this. First being intention. And I think this really it's a very multidisciplinary plan. It involves being aware and also working on our behaviors, actions, and thoughts. So it's kind of like a BAT, the BAT of building resiliency, our behaviors, actions, and thoughts.
Great. And you describe this as a journey, which and I love that language and that metaphor, because I think there's a tendency for people to say, I am resilient, yes or no. Either I am or I am not. And in reality, I think that's the wrong question. It's, would I benefit from being more resilient? And the answer is almost always yes. And if done the right way, more resiliency is really only going to help, and you're going to continue to have those benefits. So I think we should be asking ourselves, what are the steps I can take to become more resilient? Not, do I need it or not? Yes, we all do, and we need to do it. So now if we know, okay, it can be measured, it can be improved, the benefits are huge, and I want to try to become more resilient. Now I'm motivated. So tell me, what's the step-by-step guide?
Yes.
How do I do it?
Yes. So like I said, the first is intention. So a commitment that I am committed to this and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to break it down. The way I look at it is I'm a big believer in simplification. So from a strategy standpoint, for those of us who have busy lives, the 3-step strategy is prioritize, simplify, delegate. We need to create some brain space, and oftentimes we are all human doings versus human beings.
I love
that. So we really have to focus on getting to the place of human being. And once we've done that, the next comes the tactics. So what are some things I can do to really become the best resilient version of myself continuously? First and foremost, I think at the core is emotional awareness and the ability to regulate. The second, I would say, alignment with MVP, meaning values, purpose, something that we did in our resiliency audit, right? And the third, and something that I find probably the most important thing, is connections. And I could probably walk through my personal practice and something that I've shared with patients over the last decade and a half, and it's rooted in mindfulness. People have different ways of doing it. we are a very active family. I do everything on a tennis court. I don't need to, I don't need to sign up for a yoga studio or buy gear to really practice any of this. So with my emotional regulation, the two key emotions that I always try to focus on is gratitude and acceptance. Gratitude is something that comes easier than acceptance. So for those of you who are beginning on this journey, it's I would say it's a very exciting thing. Imagine there can be so many degrees of gratitude. The most, I would say, evident way in which we do it is saying thank you to people around us, but deepening that level of gratitude by thinking about people that you haven't thought about. So my kindergarten teacher is often in my thoughts. So gratitude is a very strong foundational emotion that allows people in general to become more resilient. And then, of course, acceptance is something that we all struggle with depending on the situation. But the key here is to not give up. The second is a practice of alignment with our meaning, values, and purpose. In our professions, that's something not very difficult to do. Every single time I'm in the room with a patient, it's an instant sort of like, I'm so thankful and I'm so grateful that I get to do what I do. There are days where I'm lagging behind and catching up on my notes, and I have 50 different messages. And thanks to technology and transformation, those elements are getting better, but it is not that hard to lose sight of why we are doing what we are doing when we face challenges. So always coming back, I think, is helpful. And then finally, connectivity and social connections. If there's one big message that our listeners want to take from this is don't do it alone. And it's not fun when you do it alone. It's not sustainable when you do it alone. And it doesn't give you as much benefit if you do it alone. So that leaning on others, creating connections is extremely important. One practice that I have with my family, and I would encourage you to do that tonight, is when you get back home, and this is something like 20 years ago when I got back home, my first instinct was, why are there dirty shoes in the mudroom, and why is the kitchen sink, overflowing with dirty dishes, and pick up your, laundry. And it's this correctional mode, like that, what's wrong around me, let's fix it attitude, versus now it's, oh my God, I have my loved ones around me. It's almost like treat your loved ones like your pets treat you. Like, how does your dog welcome you when you get back home? Do we do the same to our loved ones? So meaningful connection without judgment, and celebrating our connections is a key way of building resilience.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And the part about the connection, sort of goes back to one of the common misconceptions that you mentioned earlier, where a lot of people think in resiliency, that means you have to go it alone. And it's actually quite the opposite. And I would tell people a lot of times, just because you can do it alone doesn't mean you should. Can and should are very different words. I can survive on 2 hours of sleep for the next day, but should I? No. I'm going to be much better if I have 7-8 hours of sleep. And so just because you can doesn't mean you should. And sometimes I think we take this I did it all by myself as this badge of honor, when in reality I think true leaders and people who understand getting the most out of their intention efforts know how to make the most and obtain synergy by working with the people around them, which I think can be immensely helpful.
Absolutely. And if I could just add to that, I think this I'm going to do this alone can be a very I'm the only one who does this right kind of a mindset as well. So letting others do things is infinitely more difficult than doing it yourself. So those of us, who have struggled with it or continue to struggle with it, that's a challenge to you. Allow people to do it, and then celebrate them, because there isn't just one good way of doing anything.
Great. So to recap that, I like that you said sort of the first stage is setting the intention. And in doing that, you have to prioritize, simplify, and delegate. And then second, talking about the tactics, emotional awareness and regulation being the first, alignment with your meaning, purpose, and values, and then connections being the third.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of great concepts in here. And just for our audience, so you know, we're actually going to have dedicated sessions in the Human Optimization Project to all of these topics: meaning, purpose, values, gratitude, acceptance, connections, emotional regulation, and emotional awareness. So if you're interested, be on the lookout. There's going to be more of those coming. So as people start on this journey and they're trying to improve their resiliency, they're not going to get it perfect. None of us are. We're all going to mess up and have times when we fail. I often think it's helpful to think about that a little bit ahead of time. So if you know that that's going to happen, you can anticipate it, and then you're not so devastated when you mess up. What are some common pitfalls that people can fall into, or common barriers that they may face on their journey to become a more resilient person?
Yeah, the one that jumps out immediately and something that I discuss with my patients proactively is don't make goals, make habits. That's a huge pitfall, because I sit down with a lot of patients and I hear things like, well, if I can achieve 1, 2, and 3 in life, then I'm going to be happy, and it will be a testament to my resilience that I was, able to complete task 1, 2, and 3. I think that's backward. I think that's broken. So my biggest thing is make habits as you embark on this journey, and wherever you are on your journey, and it's possible you are the most resilient person on a team, but all of us can get better, right? So that'll be my first and foremost. The second is, this isn't about like a societal metric that will be incentivized. This is you. This is deeply personal. Nobody else can come in and give you a certificate of completion. And so enjoy it as it's a journey. It's not a destination, because it's work in progress. It looks different on different days. And so have fun with it. If it starts feeling like work, so there's a difference between being intentional and being overtly disciplined around it. And I favor intentionality versus, we heard this podcast and they gave us 3 things to do and I'm going to stick to this. So these are suggestions, okay? Right. And you may have a better way to do it. The most important thing that I see in people who benefit from daily practices is the key ingredients, which is intention, which is commitment, which is awareness, and which is like, I'm not giving up, and I'm going to celebrate. So don't postpone your joy. This should not feel like work. This should be fun, something we look forward to, something that we can, derive immediate and long-term benefits from.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think another common misconception on resiliency is that people think that it basically just means enduring pain and suffering. Yeah. And I think that sometimes that might be the case. You may be in a situation that is terrible and there is pain and suffering, and that's okay if that's what that event calls for in your life. But I think your journey to being a more resilient self doesn't mean you have to beat yourself up with self-flagellation and just crazy discipline and be miserable, and that it should be a process that you set up to enjoy. And I love what you said about prioritizing the habits over the goals. And one of the problems with goals is that they force us to delay our joy or gratification. We're not happy until we achieve that goal. And in reality, we don't always achieve that goal, so we may never be happy. Yeah. So if we can form the habits and systems that push us towards that goal, then we can have process satisfaction, and we can enjoy the small steps and celebrate the little milestones along the way, which I think is huge. And that's critical for us for sustaining ourselves and maintaining our own well-being and sanity in this crazy, busy world that we live in.
Couldn't agree more. And if I could just paraphrase what you said. So instead of looking at resilience as bouncing back with adversity, I challenge that, and my view on this is bouncing forward with joy. And there's a fundamental difference, right? Like one is reactive, the other is proactive and developmental.
Very well said. Extremely wise word. This has been a phenomenal session. I love it. I've taken a lot of notes, as I like to do. So I'd like to take a minute and just kind of summarize for the audience and myself kind of the biggest take-home points for me. So first, I thought it was really interesting how we talked about resiliency really impacts every domain of human performance. It affects our joy, our well-being, our happiness, our physical function, reduces burnout, so many different areas. It even changes us at a genetic level. It increases our lifespan. I mean, it's huge. So I think that's critical for us to call out. I think also this is not about us doing it alone. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And in fact, finding community or connection is going to be one of the key ingredients in being successful in this. Interesting to see that resilience is something that is real. It can be objectively measured. It can be objectively improved. Requires both an appropriate mindset and physical action. The idea you had with the resiliency audit I thought was perfect, where we kind of assess where we're at physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then ultimately the key to everything here is sort of setting the intention and deciding what you want to do and how you're going to do it. So this has been a wonderful session for me.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
That almost sounded like an AI note taker. That was fabulous.
Good.
Oh my God.
Good. Well, I could use it. That's me trying to unscramble my my doctor handwriting here, which is not very good. But good. Glad it came through. So we gave you a chance to kind of answer our three big questions for us over the last 40 minutes or so. I'd like to give you a chance to give us the rapid fire answer. So our first big question: what exactly is resiliency, and why does it matter so much for health, happiness, and performance?
So resiliency is bounce forward with joy. It matters because you don't want to postpone your joy. So do not postpone your joy.
All right. I'm supposed to be done taking notes, but I'm still taking notes as we go. Our second one: why do so many of us struggle to be resilient, and how does that hurt us personally and professionally?
We struggle to be resilient because of three big reasons. First is cultural, because we are expected to be successful when we are stoic, and if we are not, then we need to face consequence. The second is societal. Societal success is often measured by productivity versus recovery, and I think that's a big reason why we struggle with it. And the final is a human level, a neuroscientific reason, because we are all wired to pay attention to threats versus opportunities. And it's a design which we should be thankful for, because we do survive very well because of that, but it comes with a trade-off.
And we're not as good as we should be about distinguishing between threats and
Correct.
opportunities in our world today. Well, thank you so much. This has been an excellent discussion. We really appreciate sharing your wisdom with us. We always like to end the session with a challenge or a call to action that we give to our audience. So to the audience, our session today is titled Improving Resiliency: How to Thrive When Life Gets Messy. So here's our challenge to help you take the first step in that process. You saw us do a quick 60-second resilient audit in this session today. So we want you to do the same thing. So take 60 seconds, pause, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and assess where you're at physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And for the spiritual component, that may be challenging for some people, but try to tie that back to your meaning, purpose, and values. And if you can do that, I think that will help you. So see where you're at in those three areas, and that will probably give you a good idea of where you need to start on your resiliency journey. And then also remember, as you try to develop a plan, Anjali laid out an excellent plan for us in our third section. You start with your intentions, and then focus on what you prioritize, simplify, and delegate, and then look into the tactics. So emotional awareness and regulation, alignment with your meaning, values, and purpose, and then finally, social connections. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Human Optimization Project.
Thank you so much
Go.
for having me. It was such a great discussion. And congratulations and kudos to you. Such an important topic that you're tackling with so many different viewpoints. And I can't wait to listen to all the other episodes.
Great. There's plenty more coming, and we're going to cover a lot of the topics that we touched on today. So for our audience, be sure to tune in. So that's a wrap on this session, Improving Your Resiliency: How to Thrive When Life Gets Messy. And life is messy. Accept it, lean into it, thrive in it. Thanks for joining us. Remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.